Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to talk about Phandelver, and below, the Shattered Obelisk, Chapter 4, and we're going to have a robust spoiler discussion specifically of a canonical event in Dungeons & Dragons. The first time this has ever happened canonically in Dungeons & Dragons. Major change for Dungeons & Dragons. So let's get into it. All right. So what happened? What's the big canonical change? Well, Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, is a very unusual D&D Canon hardback. What it is it's a recraft of Lost Mine of Phandelver with a significant expansion, right? And I think this is one, I truly believe, I believe Dungeons & Dragons is the most important piece of art any human has ever made without divine intervention. So I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's, even though it has canon, right, which is usually a sacred text term, right. I don't believe there was any divine intervention in the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. But I believe, like Dungeons and Dragons, Gygax easily surpassed the work of Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci or any human artist. I think it is the greatest piece of human art ever created, right? And what's really fascinating is the things that happen on it matter, and there's a historical record, a continued historical record of Dungeons and Dragons that is pretty astounding, like really incredible, right? So what happened on so I think the best way to actually consider these representations of old content is that think of a house, right? Or actually think of a hotel, right? And think if someone was like, okay, we're going to replace this hotel, and they just literally do the work, and they put a gigantic metal slab underneath the existing, and then off on another site they recreate the hotel completely, but it's all brand new, it's exactly the same measurements as the old one, right? But it's just completely refreshed, all new. And if you know hotels, this is important, right? Because the smoke gets in the walls, and people run their fingers against the the door jams, and it just gets grimy, right? But here it's all fresh and new, and that's this Elmop refresh. This Legends of Mines of Phandelver is. It's just a complete rebuild from the ground up. But this hotel's got a completely new wing. And that new wing is chapters 5 through 8. Okay? Chapters 1 through 4 are just a representation with new material from Legends of Mines of Phandelver. However, between those two divisions, right after chapter 4 is done, there is a big warning, literally a badge in the book that says you, as the dungeon master, must get your players' consent to continue. And the reason why is the rest of this story deals with mind flayers. And there is going to be an attempt to turn every single one of your players into a mind flayer, right? And basically their bodies are going to be physically transformed. All kinds of horrible things are going to happen in their bodies, right? Now this all comes from Far Realm, right? So the mind flayers, they worship a god named Ilvash, which deals with these mind flayers, which is over these mind flayers. And so there's corruption. They're literally the player characters' bodies are going to be corrupted with these horrible, monstrous things. And so this adventure deals with body horror. What's interesting is never before in Dungeons & Dragons history has the issues of safety tools been so front and center. So and it is odd because the thing I think is the oddest thing is it's in the book, right? The person already bought this, right? And so I feel like there's a little bit of professional not greatness. I think I don't know. It's just, it feels a little icky to present this in the book. rather than on the back say this is one of the most hardcore. Like this is, and why not just bump it up to 18 and say, hey, you know, it's odd. I think the way they handled it was odd. But this is the first time in any Canon, D&D Canon hardback, where the Dungeon Master says they have to get player consent. This is huge. And of course, Twitter just melted, right? Every OSR grognard, you know, scuttled out of their little grognard cave and was like, oh, back in my day, let me tell you, sonny. Right, you know, and like a bunch of people on Twitter lost their mind, right? Like it was just like, oh, I'm just going to kill your character. Complain, blah, 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 right? So there was a lot of that, right? And it's interesting. It's interesting, right? Now the reality is we know 2023 proved the OSR and the indies are done. Nobody cares, right? And the best way to understand Dungeons & Dragons is absolutely nothing done on Dungeons & Dragons is ignored by the public at large, okay? Absolutely nothing, with one or two exceptions. Actually, absolutely nothing is done on the OSR or the indie that the public at large cares about. That is the difference, right? So the reality is I am getting more, I would say, tolerance for and more forgiveness in my heart for the OSRs and the indies, because I think it was a virtual daggers out true battle this year, and D&D won big. The OSR and the indies' greatest champions are lying in the dirt, right? And it's finished. The fight is over, which I think is pretty fascinating. I think that's pretty fascinating, actually. So, this is where we landed. So I just wanted to take a minute, and I wanted to talk openly about this major Chapter 4 change in the law in Phandelver and below, the Shattered Obelisk, right? And also, just before we kind of wrap up, realize the effect, and this is the part I love, right? Because you'll never hear the Call of Cthulhu fans will never shut up, right? They're like, you guys should play Call of Cthulhu. We don't need to. Really? So Call of Cthulhu is straight up in Phandelver and below Last Mind, Phandelver and below the Shattered Obelisk, which is nice. I think it's because Far Realm, Mind Flayers, this ain't nothing but Call of Cthulhu, right? And I think this is Dungeons & Dragons saying, okay, we see your marginal successes. We can put that in our team, right? Which is kind of like, it's sweet. It's sweet as sweet tea. It is very nice. So what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on Dungeons & Dragons putting in the first, the very first safety tool open discussion within the D&D Canon hardback, and also saying when we go really far off the grid and we're talking about things like body horror, when we're talking about physical transformations, we're actually going to require dungeon masters to get player consent. I'm sorry I keep extending this video out. There was one more thing that I thought was really, really interesting. That badge also told players that if they did not choose to have their bodies horribly deformed by mind flayers, they wouldn't lose any game benefits. That's a lie. In my humble opinion, that is an outrageous lie. That is ridiculous, right? There is no way any dungeon master worth their salt is being like, hey, I know all of you agreed to have worms eat your brains, but Sally didn't, and that's not going to hurt her in the narrative. That is an outrageous lie. I love Hasbro. I love D&D. I love the D&D design team. But that's straight cap. Like, that is definitely cap. Like, and a ridiculous, absurd statement in the in that safety tool warning. So I think that cap, that does straight cap, man. That's absurd. It is absolutely. If you ain't on board, honestly, I think what they should have said is, if you're not down with this, now's your time. Step away from the table. You've done, right? Like, I don't think that they should have mixed groups saying, hey, Becky, I see those braids are eating your worm. That looks terrible. I told the DM that I would not like that, and now I'm fine, and you're almost dead. Like, there's no possibility. That's straight cap. That is straight cap. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion about Phandelver and Below the Shattered Obelisk. Chapter 4, the biggest safety tool, prominence highlight ever in Dungeons & Dragons. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.